So, we live and recording. Perfect. So, hello everybody and welcome to our next Museum I/O talk on practicing sustainability. For those of you who don't know Next Museum I/O, we are a digital platform for co-creation and co-creation. And together with other institutions as well as the community, which means everyone who's interested, we want to discuss and actively shape the museum of the future. Next to the collaborative conception of exhibitions and the development of experimental approaches, our aim is to offer a space for discourse with talks like this one today. So our today's guests are Marcela Sabino, innovation designer, foresight strategist, creative director, and head of innovation at the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Tino Sehgal, artist and co-curator of the exhibition and program Down to Earth that was shown last summer at the Martin-Gropius-Bau in Berlin. And last but not least, Caitlin Southwick, founder and executive director of Culture, a global organization dedicated to creating actionable steps to make cultural heritage a leader towards a sustainable future. So welcome and thank you so much for being with us today to talk about this very important topic. Thank you. So before we start the discussion, just some short information for the audience. Some of you I can see already discovered the chat on the right-hand side. Feel free to put any comments, feedback, additional information regarding the topic in this chat. And we also have the Ask a Question button at the bottom bar you can see. And you can put your questions for our speakers there. And my dear colleague Marina and I will try our best to get them all answered today. Great. So maybe we can start that the three of you just tell us a little bit about yourselves, about your current projects and your perspective on the topic of sustainability in arts and culture. Marcela, would you like to start?
Sounds great. I will start. I prepared a quick presentation that I'll go through very quickly, and then we can discuss anything that you guys are interested in the comments. So, Alina, let me know if everything is good. Yes. Okay. I will assume it's good.
Yeah, it is.
All right. So the Museum of Tomorrow, for those of you that don't know, this is the museum. It's a it's a museum of applied science and technology, and we offer the visitors possibility to engage with contemporary science and future scenarios. So it's part of a large urban redevelopment project that happened in 2015. It opened in December of that year. It was designed by Santiago Calatrava, and he developed it after going to the botanical garden and seeing the longilinear form of the bromeliad that's there. So the museum was created like a musical score. It has 5 moments. It's 180 meters long, 14 meters high, and each of these areas is a question. So where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we? And this talks about our moment at the Anthropocene. Where are we headed to and how do we want to get there? And that's the first place where it ties into this concept of sustainability that we're talking about today. So very quickly to tell you a little bit about the elements here. So it's we've had over 5 million visitors since December 2015. 42% are not usual museum visitors, and 12% have never visited a museum before. So we have a very different target group. It's a new kind of museum, considering the science museums that look at evidences of the past or processes that are happening currently. It looks at this idea. The key message is that tomorrow is today. At every point on Earth, it is, it's becoming day or becoming night. There's not a very clear boundary. So, and we say today is the key place of action. And that ties into the sustainability aspect as well, because we need to act in the way that we want to see the world. So our ethical guidelines are sustainability, how we want to interact with the world, conviviality, how we want to interact with each other, knowledge and innovation. And just to give you some elements about sustainability of the museum itself, these these things that are raised up, these are solar panels. So they're raised according to the sun. On the right is the east side, and on the left is the west side. It has a filtered bay water, so it goes and gets the water in the cold parts of the bay, and then brings it to lower the AC temperature. So we gain energy efficiency in that way. It also filters the water to be into the water features around there, and that also lowers the temperature. Rio, for those of you who know it, is very hot, so this also helps as well. We have an HVAC, an air conditioning system that is automated, and we kind of attune it to different moments during the year, depending when it's hotter, when it's colder, when the sun is up, when it's not, so that we can get the biggest energy uses out of it, because it's very expensive and uses a lot of energy. And also we have a technological system within the whole museum that's an RFID that tracks the visit of people. Everybody gets this. It's their card. It's an RFID inside. The museum has 3 different languages, and people, their visits can be tracked, and we can interact with them later on. So I don't have time to go into all of this, but 2 areas that I want to talk about. What humans have created. This is one of the areas of the museum. So how do we celebrate? How do we love? How do we die? How do we work? These are images from around the world that describe that. The Anthropocene also is where are we, as I was saying in the questions. That is this pulsating center. It's this kind of digital experience where people see how humans have become a geological force. Accessibility, we look at visual disability, neurodiversity, auditory, physical, and we try to do all of our exhibitions through that way. The neighborhood program, we have low-income communities nearby us, and we have 5,000 neighbors inscribed in this program, subscribed, and that means they can get in for free whenever they want. That's one of our neighbors. We do 2 main programs also, the African and Indigenous matrices, where we talk about the future of these different groups that have been so important in Brazil. So it's a performance. It says, before white people did not exist. It's an artist, Indigenous artist, who did that performance. Teacher training between museums, where we take low-income students and take them, starting with the Museum of Tomorrow, to get this thirst for going between museums, and then telling you a little bit about the lab, where I was director for 5 years now. I'm head of innovation in the Museum of Tomorrow. So it's a place of doing. So we talked about co-creation. We always have creative questions. So this is, how can the future of fashion be more sustainable, more inclusive, more customizable, and how can clothing be interface? So if it's the museum's a dissemination of scientific information, the lab is participation, where we're trying to co-create, to have artists, scientists, residents from beyond. We have workshops, exhibitions that we do. This is about hacking your city. The other one was about data. And our mission is to prototype a more sustainable and social future using high-low tech in a transdisciplinary way. And it's an innovation experimentation platform at the intersection of science, art, and technology. So here are some areas of focus. So we, the effects and results of technology like AI, IoT, robotics, digital fabrication, nano and biotech, and the future of areas like work, fabrication, food, art. We did a program on that, clothing, urbanization, among many others. To finish off, some quick highlights. So we wrote the first samba written by an AI in the world. Actually, it was 2. I can explain later. The artistic residency. This is the result of that picture that you saw before. That was 5-month artistic residency about the future of fashion. Here you can see some of the works on display. And we had biofabrics made from kombucha, 3D cutting, laser, and electronics. Here you can see the exhibition from Beyond, an artistic residency and exhibition. So this is to explain that oftentimes we do artistic residencies of artists, scientists, developers, designers, and we join them to create these exhibitions together. So here you can see some of these, what they resulted in, an exhibition with 8 creative AIs. We work with some artists to create those. So you could draw with the AIs, you could create music with the AIs, you could kind of guide the AIs, hacking the city, workshops and activities, and a few other things that I don't want to take up too much time. A techno-shamanic experience in VR, which we collaborated with indigenous groups and also artists. Here you can see what it looked like. Fellowship program, future of food, VR boot camp, so looking at VR, artistic VR experiences, posters for the future done with some futurists. What would food on Mars be like? Artistic performance with VR. This artist came from London and did this performance with two other artists, a choreographer and a musician. And just to wrap up this very quick run through, thinking about museums in the service of society and its development, that's ICOM's definition, and looking at them as alternative education spaces that develop these future skills that the World Economic Forum thinks about in terms of creative thinking, problem solving, things that are all necessary if we want to have a more sustainable world. So that's it. I hope I said it quickly, but we can talk about these things later. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Marcela. I really love the idea of the museum as a laboratory. And Tino, I think at Down to Earth, this exhibition and program, you kind of did that too with those artistic residencies and this transdisciplinary approach. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this exhibition and maybe how it changed also the way of thinking of the institution.
Yeah. Right. I have a bit of feedback. First of all, thank you, Elena, for the invitation. Can you still hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, maybe because you asked us to speak for 5 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about my background because I think that makes it kind of clearer. I grew up in a place where Daimler-Benz and Hewlett-Packard had huge production facilities in Sindelfingen by Stuttgart. And my childhood looked onto the city, high rise. So I could see that the largest part of the city, town was occupied by production. And my school bus was the bus also for the shift workers, and everybody's parents were either working at the conveyor belt, building the cars or the computers, or they were in management. And I think for me, I understood in school that this wasn't really sustainable, and also understood that it wasn't sustainable also in a psychological sense, you know, like it was a bit boring. I didn't want to spend my life somehow furthering production, which is actually doesn't do us well neither psychologically nor, let's say, ecologically. And then I remember, like in the early 90s, there was a kind of, how do you say this in English? Kind of study, let's say, where they looked at like how much carbon dioxide people use who vote for the Green Party and have a green conscience versus maybe people who vote for the Christian Democrats. And it came out that the people who vote for the Green Party, they use the most carbon dioxide.
Because, sorry, Tino, to interrupt you. We just got the feedback that you are not good to understand, actually. I mean, it worked before, but do you maybe...
Yeah, I don't know. I also hear myself.
Okay.
I can try.
Yeah, this solves the problem quite often.
Is it better now? Can you hear me now?
Keep on talking. Keep on talking a little bit, please.
Yeah, okay. So it's still feedbacking.
Yeah. Do you have a second device running with Crowdcast?
No.
No.
But I can turn off. So that's weird. Does this help? No. Should I just continue talking?
Or maybe shall we continue with Caitlin, and you can we can check meanwhile.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a short question, Tino. Are you via laptop or iPhone, or
Laptop.
what's your device?
Laptop.
iPhone? Laptop? Okay.
Maybe I'll go out while Caitlin's speaking and come back in.
And you come again, and we switch to Caitlin. Yeah, we'll just try again. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries.
Okay, sorry for that. It perfectly worked when we were in the green room. But yeah, maybe let's continue with Caitlin and get back later to Tino. Caitlin, can you tell us a little bit more about cake culture and what you work with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Testing. Can you guys hear me okay? Good. All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you, first of all, Lena, for having me. And it's such a pleasure to be here with Marcela and Tino. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Caitlin Southwick. I'm the founder and executive director of Key Culture. And my background is actually in art conservation. So I'm a trained stone conservator. I worked in conservation for 8 years all around the world at the Uffizi Gallery, the Vatican Museums on Easter Island. So I had the best career. But I was very conscious of the fact that my job while conserving our culture was destroying our planet. And I thought, there's such a dichotomy and a similarity between preserving culture and preserving the planet, that why is this, fighting each other? We should be working together on this, and conservation of our planet and conservation of our culture. And these things just need to go hand in hand. And so I started looking into ways that we could be greener, I guess, in the conservation field, and found that there was a real lack of information and a real lack of resources for someone like me who wanted to be more sustainable. And then I started realizing that actually I wasn't the only one who wanted this. And so I started an organization that was more of a network to bring together like-minded conservators. And through my work at sustainability and conservation, I then went over into the International Council of Museums and was invited to be a member of their working group on sustainability. And about a year into this, obviously that was a realization for me that it's not just conservation that has this problem, but also museums and actually all of culture, from the visual arts to built heritage to archaeology. There is this need and want to be sustainable, but there's a real lack of action. And there's a lot of talk, but people were kind of stuck at what to do. And so I spent a few years kind of looking into and delving into why this was. And based on the blockades that I found, I started Key Culture. And, one of the biggest problems, of course, with sustainability was a lack of time. Oftentimes sustainability in the cultural sector is addressed by people who are very passionate about it, but on a volunteer basis. So it's something that's done by, a group of volunteers within a museum who form a green team, or, an appointed working group. But once again, we all have full-time jobs and families and other things to do. So sustainability tended to fall to the wayside. Another big issue was a lack of expertise. There were people who were curators and conservators and museum directors who were all of a sudden in charge of sustainability, and we didn't necessarily know what that meant. And the last problem was a lack of communication. And there's so many amazing things. I mean, Marcela just showed us such a beautiful example of a museum that is leading the way in terms of sustainability, and not everyone knows about that. And those types of initiatives should be shouted from the rooftops and, duplicated in other parts of the world. And so I founded Key Culture to really address these issues and to help empower people like me who want to be sustainable and don't know where to begin. Sustainability, I keep saying this word that some people really hate it and glaze over when you start throwing the S word around. But it's this concept that's really intangible and overwhelming, and it's somewhere up in the air in the future. But how does it apply to me as an as a conservator or as a curator or as a registrar, as an artist, how do I engage with this in my everyday life? And those are the questions that we really aim to answer at Key Culture. And so we have two main missions. The first is to make the sector more sustainable. So by providing programs, tools, and resources to professionals and institutions around the world. I'll talk about those in just a second. And then the second mission is really, how can we use culture to educate the public about sustainability? So how do we use the power of art and spaces and our museums to connect with our local communities, to solve issues together, and to create empathy and understanding that will then drive real change. So this is the scope of what we do, and our main program that we're launching this year is called Key Futures, and this really focuses on that first part, because we think very strongly that if the cultural sector wants to be the driver for a sustainable future, they need to practice what they preach. So we need to be sustainable ourselves so that we're able to effectively demonstrate how to be sustainable and also advocate for it. And so Key Futures is really everything that I wanted when I was a professional about how to be sustainable, from a training program to a mentorship program to an online portal with case studies and hubs, and of course the key books, which are a free downloadable resource. If you haven't checked them out yet, please do so. You can download them off of our website, and those are your step-by-step guides on how to be sustainable. And the first three that we launched in January are waste materials, social sustainability, and energy. And we're currently developing the next 5 because there's a lot to cover. So January of 2022, we'll be launching exhibitions. And then we've decided we're going to roll out a new one every 3 months. So following exhibitions, we will have education and outreach, water, Indigenous relations and traditional knowledge, and then our waste materials part 2. And what makes the key books unique is that they're co-written and co-created by cultural professionals and sustainability experts. So we bring in people who actually know a little bit about what to do in terms of energy saving, and we bring in the people who know what the specific needs of the institutions are, and we put all of this together and then make it accessible, actionable, and straight to the point. So hope those are helpful for everybody. But I think that, it's interesting because we're having this conversation today, and just before the talk started, we were discussing that this was one of the most popular topics that has been shown in Next Museum IO, and it's just really exciting that that there's so much interest in this. And so, of course, I'm thrilled to see so many people here today, and really excited to talk with my fellow panelists more about these topics.
Great, thank you so much, Caitlin. I put the link from K-Culture in the chat so everyone can check it out and download the great books. Tino, shall we try again?
Yeah,
I think it's better, yeah.
I can also put off my sound. Is this better, Marina? You're muted now.
Marina, you're muted.
It was actually never really bad with my earphones, but we have the feedback from the community. So probably we can't do it for everybody best. I just say keep on.
Okay, so because I also have feedback. That's what's confusing for me. Like I hear myself. Okay, keep myself down maybe. So this study was kind of really important for me to understand that there's a big difference in terms of conscience about ecological and actually real ecologically helpful behavior. So somebody who's maybe more, living in a village, doesn't care about this topic, doesn't go on big vacations to the other part of the world, has a better carbon footprint than somebody who's talking about this all the time and thinks this is a really relevant thing for the future, And so then I kind of embarked on my work in that vein, that I thought, I'm not going to talk about this topic at all. I'm just going to do a topic, just going to do a work which doesn't use a lot of materials and thereby doesn't produce carbon and operates in different modality. So I did that for 20 years, and surprisingly, it was found a lot of interest in art, but never for the fact, how I started with it. And I also kept on my protocol of like not really talking about how it started, because I thought that's the whole experiment here. I want to do something which is attractive because it's attractive, but not because it's sustainable, because I think that is a more sustainable way working forward. Like if I grew up with the green movement in Germany in the 80s, and it was a lot about this kind of, that's my identity, but your identity doesn't actually matter. That's what this study showed. And then so now, like some other art world slowly is caught up to this topic. And I think one of the reasons that it's caught up to it is because, the movement of, very young people still going to school, really putting this out, and my generation understanding like we actually knew all these things in the 90s, but we didn't really take action, and now we can't. Now these people are children, and we can't really look away. So suddenly, for the first time in my life, it became like a topic in my own field, and it was a peculiar moment for me, because I didn't travel by plane, and people will always be like, "Oh, well, why are you doing that? Are you afraid of flying?" And now suddenly it's become like, now I get interview requests about like, "Oh, you didn't fly for 20 years. So how does that work actually?" And for the correct reason, not because of some fear of flying. And so then when Gropius-Bau, this show Down to Earth, or Berliner Festspiele, I should say, the institution that runs Gropius-Bau, like in the person of Thomas Oberender, the director, came to me and said, like, "I want to do this show on sustainability, and Bruno Latour's book Down to Earth." And I said, "Yeah, okay, I get it, but I'm not going to participate in something which is more of the same, just talking about things, If we want to do a show on sustainability, then the first important thing is that we are sustainable, right? And so I said, I'm only going to participate if we do it without electricity. Nobody can fly to the show. Berlin is a city with a lot of international artists, so we take mostly people from Berlin, and we also switch off the climate control, because that's 2/3 of the thing, 2/3 of the energy. And then everyone was like, okay. They needed a day, and then they came back to me and said, like, let's do that. Then the thing with the climate control, then you realize, we managed to push through everything, but the climate control was then difficult, so I think that's where what Caitlin is saying, really, it's a lot about expertise, it's a lot about details which are not that, German would say schöngeistig, they're not so interesting to talk about in a way. Not so interesting to talk about, the climate control, and the technicalities of that. It's much more interesting to talk about, I don't know, like a new kind of ontology. That's the professionalism of the art world, is to have these discourses and to throw them around. And I said, yeah, okay, but let's stop that for a moment. Let's look at these boring things, and why can we not switch off the climate control? Because somebody's afraid that then they will see in the graph of the climate over the year, they will see a dip in the constant temperature of 20 degrees, 50%. They will see a dip, and this will hurt the reputation of this place, which doesn't have its own collection. So people were up in arms, and when you go towards action, I'm sure that Caitlin has made this experience many times, but when you actually go to where the action is, so where you can actually save carbon dioxide, which in museums is mostly the air conditioning and the travel, but mostly air conditioning, you suddenly see that like all the nice talk kind of disappears, and now we can sit here and be all nice to each other, and we all have the same intentions, and from the 100 people who are in the audience, everybody would say this is an important topic, and the same if you go down the street. But if you suddenly say, well, this is an important topic, and you have to maybe kind of not do your normal procedures, no, my normal procedures, that's why I'm here, so I think that's the point where we are at that. And I think we had a similar conversation in Down to Earth, a similar panel about museums and sustainability, and echoes a little bit something. The last thing I want to say in this beginning presentation, that what you're doing at the Museum of Tomorrow, is to wait. What was my is to say we are doing something for the better good. I saw that in your presentation, I think in the Google Doc, like we are doing, museums are there for the greater social good. We cannot do something which is not for the greater social good, which is unsustainable behavior, point blank. And that should be, in my opinion, the linkage, where you can say, like that's for me the core argument. No, like you cannot come to our show with a plane, and even we had, a friend of Caitlin's, like, and it goes into our customary. We had a friend of Caitlin's coming, and it was interesting to see that process, because we had with most artists, she had to take a train for 16 hours. She had never taken a train for 16 hours. And we didn't really, we let her be, and we gave her 3 days, and she was like, am I going to come for 16 hours on a train where I could do 1 hour on a plane to do a talk in the middle of Corona, but that's where it lies. And I said to everybody, yeah, the show is one thing, but these kind of processes and how they will reverberate in the future will be probably a much more important part of the show. And so I think we really have to argument with this. We're an institution for the future, for the greater social good. So we are the last people who can do this old style of behavior.
Great, thank you so much. So, yeah, very interesting insights. Maybe we can also take a quick look, because you also have some temporary artists there and those artistic residencies. I think I saw like a TV show where you also were talking about the ecological footprint of environmental art. I mean, in your artistic practice, you don't use a lot of material, you don't fly, as you say, but there are also artworks like, I don't know, the Ice Watch from Olafur Eliasson, for example, which is, of course, a beautiful artwork, stunning and moving. And you have those big blocks of ice presented at the Tate in London, and you can basically see the ice melting. But at the same time, they were flown in, and there's a huge ecological footprint on that. And do you think that we have to also look at that with a criterion of sustainability, or in this point, do the ends justify the means, actually?
No, I think the ends never justify the means. And every sector of society to do what they do, but do it in a more sustainable way. And that's exactly because what you're asking about now is why I started the way I started with the study. It's like, it doesn't help us. The conscience in a place like Germany, where we have a whole region like Baden-Württemberg, which is run by the Green Party, like we don't need more conscience. We've got a lot of consciousness. We need a lot of consciousness at least in Germany, now more and more in France also. And that is something that we don't need to garner that. And museum, at least the contemporary art world, which I'm part of, it doesn't really, my opinion, doesn't really have a good speaking position, because it was really like not even a stepchild. Many topics were since the 70s have been gone through the art world, but this one definitely wasn't one. So I think it's a great initiative, and museums can play their part, and I think they can play a great part, but they have to start in their own backyard and lead by example, because like Caitlin says, that's where the problem lies, and that's also the point I'm making. So I think, we don't need the art world telling us to be have better environmental consciousness. We need the art world to change, to show how, that's something that the art world is good at, like to show us how to change behavior, right? And how to go about changing your routines, that the artwork can help, and it can help doing that, like I said, by just simply doing it.
Tino, I would like to throw something in. There's a comment from the director of Museum Ulm, Stefanie Date, says that the massive internet use and this talk also is polluting the environment. What do you say when you compare analog art to all the digital projects? Do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, I agree with both comments. I see that what Stephanie wrote, but I also see what A.E. McDonald wrote, and I kind of agree with both. I don't know the numbers. I mean, I'm a contemporary artist, but I also doubt that, like, if if people would have flown in from Brazil, from the US to do this talk, that it's less CO2 than what we're doing here right now. But of course, the internet is material too, and that's why I said we're going to do a completely unplugged show, and I think we can do a good show unplugged. Because in the end, that's what I was trying to say at the beginning. What we also need nowadays in a highly individualized, highly flexibilized society like we have in most Northwestern countries, but increasingly across the world, is that we need a kind of a richness of social interaction, a psychological sustainability. And for that, the analog is often better, because you have somebody you can interact with, or you have something that you can touch, So I think a good artwork can easily be, and I think that's something I can easily, like, an analog artwork can easily be a good artwork. And I think something that I have, like, a kind of difficult relation, as you realize, with the art world in relation to this topic, because I always felt like, wow, like, this is the biggest topic of our time, like growing up in the 90s, the 2000s, and it doesn't ever show up, But on the other hand, I always liked the art world. For example, when I grew up in the 90s, there was all this idea of, like, art and tech, like Stellar, sorry to use the names, but like the, media art. And I always liked the art world that it never embraced that, really. Like, that kind of art never really made it to the top of the art world. Like, it was always like a kind of phenomenon that was there, but you can't say what is the best artwork of the 2000s or 2010s. You will find, won't find some kind of VR work or something, or kind of electronica arts work, And I think that's a good contribution from the art world, in the sense that, like, it has shown us that, like, technology is just technology, and life is more than that. And when it really comes down to it, like, technology doesn't help us that much, but ideas do, concerns do, morals, ethics do, And I think the art world has proven that in what it has chosen to put forward as its biggest proponents in the last 20, 30 years.
I would like to comment on that. I think, I see what you're saying about the idea of technology. It's a tool like any other tool, and I think that artists that use the mediums, the media that's around them of the time, I think that there's some really interesting pieces around as well in that area. Particularly in the AI and art world, I think the questions these things bring out are really interesting. Like, can AI be an artist? I mean, I think that these are the media of our times, and I think we need to use them. So I disagree in that sense, but I really do like this idea that you bring of kind of the walking the talk. It's very interesting. It's very complex, and the problems around sustainability become very thorny. And I think it's an idea of, you mentioned this idea of awareness and of, like, kind of action, the difference between awareness. A lot of us have awareness. I think that that's a perspective, potentially, I would say, more like a northern European and American perspective. Maybe not in the American case, maybe not in the American case so much, but in the European case, I agree with you.
It's very much a German perspective, actually, because we have this whole history of the Green Party. Even France, it's just happening, the consciousness now.
Right. So I think that there, in different places, there's different scales, like different places. It's like almost like meeting people where they are. If you're in an elevator and they're on the first floor, second floor, like, if you are in the 20th floor, then you're not even going to connect with them in some ways. So I think that does have an impact, but I would also say something else that I think is something really interesting for us as professionals in the culture space, in the this kind of world. assumptions are so important. I think you can see already in the chat what's happening. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions being revealed there, and that's something. For example, we thought a lot about the idea of having a museum store. Should we have that? Many of us did not want to have that, because of the consumption, of the production. Should we just make it a space? But then, other museums have a store, and so the kind of the structure within which we had to do our pitch, because we're an organization that manages the museum professionally, has to flow within that. So it's complicated, but also assumptions, like, for example, that people don't examine. So how do we start examining our assumptions? So, for example, I'll give you two examples. One is around the use of water. So water is a very precious resource. In some places, it's very there is not enough fresh water, and probably will not be in the decades to come. And then, so what happens? You have campaigns around, turning off when you're brushing your teeth, turn off the water, because, take shorter showers. Okay, let's do that. And it's great. But what actually happens, once you start looking to where the water usage is, in some places, here especially, but in many other countries in the world, the main usage is industry. So you have some places where industry can use 70% of the water. And in that way, when you have campaigns and groups saying, well, take shorter showers, you're talking about 30%. Even if it's 100% of 30%, it's nowhere near where it needs to be. Similarly for recycling. And that's one thing that we often, had a big debate about, recycling in the museums. What actually happens, here and in other countries as well, might be different, but the kind of the range is similar. Things that are recycled here, I think it's around 7 or 9% or something of things that go to recycling. 7 to 9% can be recycled, and what's the energy addition into that? And then you start getting to very complex issues that they're not easy to tease out, that oftentimes we kind of gravitate towards these easy solutions of, like, what can you do in your house? Like, how can you recycle, without looking at the larger system? And so I think that that we need to be really careful going forward, because it's this idea that we are the ones we've been waiting for. There's nobody else, as Tino was very well saying, there's nobody else that's not that us, but people who are interested in this subject. And even the people who are interested in the subject may be operating with the wrong assumptions. So that is a big challenge that I see around there. So I want to put that out there.
Unmute myself. Hold on. Sorry. Can I jump in real fast? Thanks. I think Marcela and Tino, I think it's a really, really interesting points. And I wanted to add here that I think, I completely agree with you, Marcela, about, obviously, like, the closing your tap while you're brushing your teeth is not going to have as much of an impact. But I think that there's also something to be said for this, what we were talking about earlier with the consciousness aspect. And there is a consciousness in different parts of the world, and it's growing. But I still feel that people departmentalize sustainability in a lot of ways. And it's something that is either incredibly overwhelming, or it's someone else's problem. It's not something that I can do anything about. So what does it matter if I turn off the tap or not? But at the same, this is why what I really believe is that we need a grassroots, bottom up, and top down approach simultaneously. So we need to be tackling this at the policy level and with the industry and with those large polluters. But we also need to be taking that awareness and that individual responsibility seriously. And I think that it's not just about turning your tap off. I think it's about, turning your tap off and then having your, whoever's standing next to you in the conservation studio or whatever saying, like, oh, you're turning the tap off. Why are you doing that? Oh, because, it uses water and whatever. And, there is this element of education and self-education and awareness about what you're doing. But I do think that, we all have to do something, and it can be incredibly overwhelming to think that, you know, sustainability is out of my hands, and that can be very depressing as well. I mean, you see things on the news, you see, you know, I mean, we were talking before about the fact that, like, last week here in Amsterdam, people were skating on ice on the canals, and this week people are out on the beach in t-shirts. And, you know, it's terrifying that, you know, climate change is real, and it's happening right now. And what can we do about it? The systems are broken. Yes, we know that, but the systems aren't going to change unless there's a demand for the change. Or, you know, so how do we create that demand? And that also starts with our individual awareness about it. And I just think that it's so important that we advocate for individual responsibility as well as systems change. And what I think is so powerful about the cultural sector is that we have such a loud voice. And I think that what Tino was saying about, you know, practicing what you preach is something that it's not just about practicing what we preach. And I think, you know, one of the things that I'm always, because I do travel a lot, and pre-COVID, and I used to get a lot of slack for it because people are like, oh, you're the sustainability person and you're flying all over the world. And I'm like, you know, I haven't owned a car in 10 years. I don't have a child. Like, I've, you know, my other parts of me, I try to make up for that, and carbon offset, and, you know, but it is hard because sustainability is not black and white. And so it's really difficult to be perfect at it, and don't expect perfection, but like, educate yourself about it and know where you can make a really big impact. I always like to use two examples. And one of them is, you know, in the lab, in conservation labs, a lot of people are really conscious about the gloves that we use. So we use disposable nitrile gloves when handling or cleaning objects, and then we throw them away. And you can see the waste piling up, and it's really kind of shocking. But no one's paying attention to the fact that the fume extractor behind you is left wide open, and that thing consumes 3.5 times the amount of energy of a house. So while we're distracted with the gloves, the thing that's actually the bigger issue is glaring us in the face. And if we just knew that, if we just shut that, you know, we might be able to save 60% of our energy bill. And this actually goes back to what Tino was saying at the beginning of the conversation with the climate control issue. And, you know, I won't get started on that because I won't stop talking about it. But I do think that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to support you there, because I do think it's important to speak about climate control in museums, because that's something very practical, and apparently there are museum people here, and I think it's good to go into these details, even if it's a bit technical, even if it's a bit boring, because that's where the action lies. And I want to come back to it in a second, but I do want to speak for individual agency. I agree with you, individual agency and systems change, but in democratic market-based societies, it's very difficult to discern that anyway, right? And so I think in terms of the carbon problem, it's interesting to think back to the 80s, where we had two problems at the time. One was, at the time, it was called the greenhouse effect, which we now call climate change. And then there was kind of the ozone hole. Yeah. And it was produced by FCKWs, so things which were in refrigerators. So now we only speak about one of the two problems. Why is that? Because FCKWs were only in refrigerators. So it was very easy to kind of find a way to replace them. This thing was solved, and now the ozone hole is kind of closing again. But we're now not talking about greenhouse effect anymore, we're talking about climate emergency. So why is that? Why is these two paths so different? Because every single action, be it this crowdcast, be it our flying, be it my children getting some food right now from the restaurant because I'm not cooking, you know, like every action produces carbon dioxide. And that's why it's such a challenging problem to change. And that's why everybody can think about their relation to Gaia, you know, to Earth. It's like in any relation, we're going to take, but you also need to give, right? And you have to, I think the biggest thing is to be conscious of your actions, right? And so for a museum, I think it is to look at the climate control. And I think an important point there to mention is that as a museum director, you can save money there, right? Because it's one of the biggest costs you have So you're doing something good for the environment, but you also can save a lot of costs. So we, at Berliner Festspiele, we came to that point. I realized, like, okay, there's a lot of resistance, but I could see in the eyes of like the director of Berliner Festspiele, who's like, wait a minute, I have to fundraise this if we switch this off in the future. And the point is, the point that I try to make is, yes, there's a reason why climate control exists in museums. Why we have 20 degrees, 50%. It's good for old master paintings. And, I'm not a conservator, but I'm sure there's a reason why it is that way. But when we're talking about art from the 60s on, which is installation art, which is dismantle, which is video art, which is live art, we don't need those same protocols. So we have to be flexible with that, And I think that's an important point. If we are flexible with that, we can save money, we can save a lot of carbon. And I think there should be an initiative, in museums. That's why I hope ICOM will still be good, Caitlin. Like culture as well, to help museums say, like, you can save money, you can be a role model, like, be flexible with your climate control. It's really beautiful to open the window. Like, and last sentence about this, like, in Gropius-Bau, we made an inquiry, and until the late 90s, until 1998, they didn't even have climate control. That's crazy. So when they would have registrars from other museums coming, they would wipe the floor with a lot of water just before the registrar came, so that it would be humid enough, because they didn't have the technology, So, and when we open the windows, it's also artistically something else, aesthetically something else. We don't need museums in the 21st century to be like the 20th century, where it's like, we're places of culture and we control our culture and we have nothing to do with the outside world. That's not at all in the line of thinking of, let's say, Whitehead or Haraway or Latour and the network kind of thinking. We can connect all things, like open the windows, connect with the world outside. We don't have to pure climate control are super white, neutral spaces. So anyway, I want to make that point that contemporary art exhibitions could be handled differently in terms of climate control.
I wanted to comment on that in terms of a museum and doing that. I think that one of the things that we try to do very much is get people involved in kind of coming by bike, which is not something that's usually done in Rio. Temperatures here can go to 40, 45, 50, we have a different kind of scale. And then we do actually have a point where we have a lot of technological equipment. That's the majority of the museum is digital experiences, actually. So there is a point where we can't go beyond, because then the equipment starts malfunctioning. So there's definitely a cutoff point. But we actually, because of a financial situation that the city was having and all this kind of stuff, so we started testing out turning off the AC system, because once it's been going on for most of the day, it's still cold there. There's no way to open our windows. There's no opening. It's not an old building. It's a recent building. But we did test that out. And actually, we kind of did this idea of prototyping. So like, let's turn it off. The museum closes. Everybody has to be out by 6. And so 5 is the last entry. Let's close it by 5:30 and see how it is. Okay, well, it's a little bit, some people are like, what's happening? It seems like something is going on, it's a little bit hot in here, And then so we try to use it as a teaching moment, like to explain this kind of thing, like the museum uses this amount of energy, like, and so this idea of turning it off, it's still a point where it's okay, but it's a little bit hotter than if it would be earlier. And then we started turning it off a little bit earlier. So I think, it depends on the timing also. So we're very kind of cognizant of when we are in, if we're in winter here, which is not that different from summer most of the time. It's very hot here just all the time. And so, but that is something that's useful. And I think this kind of walking the talk is so important. It's not just about awareness. It's also about, what are you as a museum doing? How are you making the systems like to their limits, in terms of whether it's air conditioning, what is actually an acceptable temperature? Is it like, 26? I mean, 26 is already quite hot, but like, can that work? So I think that those kinds of questions and that testing around that is really important.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I think, as I said, I could get into the climate dialogue forever. I am a conservator, so I do know all of the background and, the just very briefly about this. And then I was interested in what Stephanie said in the chat, but, the problem with climate control right now is that no one wants to be the person who burns down the Notre Dame. People are scared to change their settings because this is the way it's been done. But as Tina was saying, it's also that it hasn't been done that way in so many museums. So they think they need to do it, but actually it can be more damaging to collections if you all of a sudden implement climate control conditions where these things have been in this fluctuating standard stable conditions for 400 years. So it's this very strange thing. But the problem is that no one knows who's the one that has to say it. When I talk to museum directors, they say it's the responsibility of the insurance company. The insurance company tells me it's the conservators. The conservators tell me it's the directors. And there was actually a recent study done by the Getty that is going to be published later, but I got a sneak peek of it. And basically it's this, whose responsibility is, and everyone's kind of pointing fingers at each other. So we all just need to sit down and say, okay, you guys are cool with it. You guys are cool with it. You're cool with it. All right, great. Let's all switch our stand-ins to, because we have the scientific evidence that says that, it's not a problem to increase your range. And it's just loan agreements are one of the really big factors right now. But you've got the Bezo Green Protocol, you have ASHRAE, you have AICCM, you have CCI, you have AIC. All of these organizations are saying we have, GCI did all of this research. We have the data saying it's okay for the collections. And as Tina was saying, a lot of the collections don't even need climate control, especially if we're talking about contemporary art. But I think that I wanted to very quickly swing back to what we were talking about in terms of individual agency and also policy. And I think that, and Stephanie made a really interesting point, that we need support from policymakers and from politicians. And I was involved in the Voices of Culture structured dialogue with the European Commission over the past couple of months, and where there was 45 groups that got together, and we kind of looked at how culture can better support the SDGs and vice versa. And then we gave a presentation to the EC about it. And it felt like really empowering to be able to, go to the politicians and say like, okay, this is what we want. But at the end, it felt also a little bit like, okay, but what are the next steps? Like they've heard our story, they've read our report, we don't know what's going to happen next. But one story that I always like to share that to me was really powerful is that, we have to continue to advocate, and we have to continue to talk to politicians and convince them that, yes, culture has to be part of the conversation. And the Climate Heritage Network is a group of different cultural organizations around the world that really works with, UN policy level advocacy for culture and sustainability. But there's an organization in North America called the Aquarium Conservation Partnership. And it's a group of like 22 aquariums that got together and said, okay, we're going to do something sustainable. So let's look at, single-use plastics. Let's all agree that we're going to ban single-use plastics at our institutions. So they all did that. And then the New York City Aquarium went out to the community, and they got 122 bars and restaurants to also agree to ban plastic straws at their institutions. And then together, they all went to the city council and got a bill on the docket at the city council to ban plastic straws citywide. And that's the kind of leverage that's the kind of power that we need to be leveraging. That's the kind of influence that we have as cultural institutions. And that's why it's so important, as artists, as museum directors, that we don't just do stuff and not talk about it. We have to be vocal about what we're doing. We have to practice what we preach, but we also have to communicate that to our communities. We have to be communicating that to our city council, to our politicians. We have to start being louder. And I think that's would love to hear what you guys think.
I want to kind of tag along from there. I think also, to me, I agree with Marcela, there's very different levels of consciousness, awareness in different parts of the world. Like the show that I'm about, to speak about today was in Berlin. Two, an audience to come to a contemporary Kunsthalle. So it's also a specific segment of society in a way. And but I think it's not only about, our focus there was not only about like practicing what you preach or walking the walk, but it was also acknowledging the fact that learning how to walk, like changing your routines, finding new ways, of operating is not easy. And it also takes courage. And that's what you say about it. I mean, it was for me amazing to hear talk just now, Caitlin, about how everybody's pointing fingers about this climate control thing, because I had no idea, And then I was in the middle of it, like seeing it happen in one institution, And I think it's important to show ways for people that this is the way you can do it, Like, and this, what Marcela was saying, I had no idea that you were already doing about this, working on this. That's why this one thing that will come out of this panel for me is that when we have met so much resistance, we say like, okay, can we just switch it off during the night, and then bring it back during the day, because then there were also Corona regulations that the AC needed to be on, although we were a contemporary art show, and there was actually no old master painting in the whole building, It was really just about the insurance company and showing that the temperature line is a straight line, more or less, And I think another thing which was interesting in terms of like learning how to walk, learning how to behave differently, is that art institutions are places, or museums are places which have a lot of people coming in and people coming out. These people are kind of like ambassadors and diplomats, the artists, the speakers, and to say to them, and we had this conversation with the German Cultural Foundation, saying like, why do funding bodies like the German Cultural Foundation, why do they fund plane travel under 1,200 kilometers? Like there's no reason why you should fund that. It's not better. It's not for the better social good. You don't have to tell people that they have to take the train or the bus, but you don't have to fund the plane, right? There's a difference there. And for example, my experience was down to earth that 90% of the speakers and artists who traveled to Berlin, they had never taken a night train. Wow. And they were literally scared. Like a friend of mine, Jochen Bell, who flew for his whole life, he told me this funny story. He flew across the world doing his work. When he started to, when his daughter started becoming aware, he became more aware too. And then he said the first time he took a train from Paris to Berlin, he made such a stack of sandwiches, for the trip. And then he realized, like, but this, it's so banal, but that's what I encountered. People are afraid because they don't know what's going to happen. Like, can I sleep on a night train? We can have really interesting rhetorical speech patterns, side theory, but then at some point it comes up to these basic human things. Like, I'm afraid, will I be able to sleep? I don't know, because I haven't done a talk after I've been in the night train. And I don't know what a night train is. I had so many of my dancers from the US, like 8 years ago, they didn't even know a night train existed, And it's this kind of practicing of behaving in this way that we all need, and we all need somebody to take us by the hand or to encourage each other and say, like, well, what can happen? Okay, so maybe the Metropolitan Museum of Art is not going to loan work to us. Okay, right? Like, but we're going to try and do something for the better good, Okay. And I think that's where we identified the problem, and that was then also affirmed by people's behavior. Then people came and said, I took the train, like the night train, I could sleep, and I was excited, but it sounds really banal and childish, but I think that's where it actually lies,
I have a question. What's your opinion on the role of the visitors when it comes to sustainability? Should they demand something from the museums? Should they look at something specific when they decide to visit an exhibition? What is your opinion on the visitors?
Maybe Marcela wants to start.
Well, I think that it depends again on where they're at. We have a very wide range of visitation. So sometimes If you're talking about people who are living in the slums, I mentioned we had 5,000 friends of the museum. Sustainability is not even on their radar. It's sometimes there's shots fired, and some of our employees who are from these places, they can't even come into the museum. So you're dealing with a completely different situation. But I think that in our case, we try to take these really complex issues. Like, you can see how complex these issues are. They're not easy. It's not easy to find out, what works, what doesn't, how is bottom up, top down, how are the politicians getting involved, how is the museum. There's so many things, and it's so complex. So one of the things that we try to do is take this kind of dissemination of scientific information. How do you get this information in using clear language, and also kind of language of art and design? We have some installations, we have some things like that we try to get across throughout the museum itself. And that's what we do. And then we've added an exhibition, which is our newest one in the main exhibition, which is an AI that, in partnership with IBM Watson, it asks you what you're concerned about. And what it does is it says, okay, so once you've been through this, what are you concerned about? So if you say violence or sustainability, it'll give you information on those things. And then it'll give you a few NGOs or institutions that are working on these issues, that you can, that are vetted by us, that you can go and get into contact with. Because the idea is we don't want people to just contemplate. We want people to get out of the museum, be impacted, because there's lots of moments that are very impactful, because we design these experiences to be, and then we want them to go out and do things. And so that's what we do with this, the final moment of the exhibition, with all the work that we do around kind of, bike transportation, around kind of, thinking about food, for example. Having a different diet is one of the things that can most tip the scales in terms of this kind of thing. So we had a whole exhibition on the future of food in 2050. So these kinds of things, particularly around, what we bring over there, whether it's that, or whether it's kind of talking about, refugees and how they handle things, or how it's talking about, kind of activists that are working to protect the rainforest from, industrial farming. Those are ways that we want to connect this very complicated subject and amorphous. Sometimes it has so many different elements around it, because it's not just like, AC in the museum. It's not. It's like about what you eat. It's about how you live. It's about, what politicians that you are, and going to the comments section, is the politician that you're going for, are they going to vote for climate change in that way? Are they going to vote for these, farmers? I mean, unfortunately, we have a politician now, a president now, that is trying to, sell as much of the rainforest as possible to make farmland, and that is going to have one of the biggest impacts on climate change. Because rainforests are a climate sink, and they interact with, climate from the entire world. I mean, just the aerial rivers that exist there. And so oftentimes we invite artists, photographers, people to kind of create these experiences beyond the main exhibition, or to talk about them, or restaurateurs who are working with kind of renewable resources and trying to like change their practice. So there's lots of different ways that we interact with that, so that we can reach the visitor where they are, and we can kind of, hopefully, just to finish off, like, we hope, and we've seen evidence of it, that people kind of get moved by something, and that they can go and take that on in whatever action that is, whether it's turning off the faucet, whether it's voting for a politician, whether it's changing their careers entirely, which we've heard of already, whether it's on all these different things. And that's really what we hope. So we also have a program on the urban garden of tomorrow. So we teach people how to do this in their own place, so that they can create urban gardens. So that's the way that we try to offer a variety of things so that people can get involved.
I'd like to add one small thing, if I may, about why are we talking, for example, about climate control, because I just kind of tripped a little bit over the thing like climate control is one thing. No, I think the way I see it in terms of individual agency because we have a climate emergency right now, right? It's every one of us is part of or is a governing body of a certain area. So I'm the governing body of my own life. Yeah? So what is the most carbon intense action I can do is taking a flight across an ocean, right? So I can think if and how to do that, right? If I'm running a museum, what is the biggest carbon impact I have? That's my AC. So that's the first thing in emergency I look to, right? Like when the house is burning, I don't go and look for, I don't know, some random piece of paper. I gotta check that, you know, my kids are out, you know, and then maybe I'll run for, you know, all my data on my computer or something, you know. I don't know what I would do. I haven't, but I mean, like talking about emergency, we're talking about what to do in each of our governing bodies. That doesn't include, of course, voting for a politician, but in a democratic, market-based society, it's always the same structure. It's like everybody, like Caitlin was saying, on this micro level of, you know, conservation, insurances, and, you know, everybody pointing finger, they're in a way making a cluster which is set in a certain position. And now this cluster has to shift position, you know, and we have that problem in anything in a market, you know, based democratic society, because individual agency is high, you know, like, and so just that, I think it's not just one topic, it's the biggest topic for museums, right? If we were now on a panel on, I don't know, at Davos or something, you know, we wouldn't be talking about ACs in museums, obviously. You know?
Yeah, I would also say something that I remember this in this one talk that was super shocking to me. But you know what you're saying, like what are these levels and what are these assumptions that we make and what are we missing, right? You know, he said he's a doctor and he was you know kind of like talking about you know one of the most carbon intensive things you can do as a person is having a child, for example, you know, like so how does it get to, you know, and some people think about that like almost as like, you know, taking a plane, you know, something like, you know, wow, would I not do that, you know, and to what level will we actually go? And that's really complicated, and in some countries they've legislated that, right? But like it is complicated because you can be talking about, you know, things like plane and like AC and stuff like that, but like have 5 children, you know, and then you know what are we putting in the balance, what it is here? And that's the thing, like how much is it going to hurt to you in a certain sense? Sometimes that's like it gets to that level, you know, like so to me that's really interesting. It was like really powerful when he said that. I was like, wow, that really is true.
I mean, if I just like to short one, if you allow me, Caitlin, like I think first of all, it still depends how the kids then behave. Like, and but I think what's really powerful is also to show the advantages of behaving in a different way. Right? For example, and then one story that I like to tell is that it's actually can be more efficient to take the train, because if you live in Europe and you take the train, let's say you take the train to Paris, in the old perspective, you say, oh, it takes 8 hours by train from Berlin to Paris, and it takes like 1 hour by plane, and you know maybe 2-3 hours getting in and out of the city, so maybe 4, like double the train is double the amount, which is a lot. But I started in my practice, you know, it's like okay, I'm going to Paris, but then on the way there's like Cologne, so I also have something to do with Cologne, and suddenly I'm more efficient, right? And that was really shown to me in when there was this, I think it was a volcano maybe 8 years ago in Iceland, which stopped plane travel. And I was invited in Paris to attend the dinner, and a number of artists from Berlin were invited to this dinner in Paris. So I was the only one probably traveled by train, and everybody else by plane, and nobody arrived on time or arrived at all. I was there on time, and I already had a meeting in Cologne as well. You know, so it's about also shifting a mindset, like other practices can be efficient, like turning off the AC or managing it, like you do at the Museum of Tomorrow, like playing with it can also be advantageous for your budget, and at the beginning you're just like, oh my God, if you do this, then I'm going to lose that. But once you go onto that route, you realize, oh wait, I lose this, but I also gain something else. Oh wow. Like I took the train to Japan, and it's like tedious, and I've taken it many times. But now we start to rehearse on the train. It takes like 6-7 days, and I realized how much calmer I start to retreat. And now next time I go, I'll be like, okay, it's 6-7 days, it's a bit tedious, but actually in the back of my mind, it's going to be my retreat, but you don't learn that if you don't start to swim. If you're on one coast and you don't start to swim, you never know how it is on the other coast and what the advantage of that place is. And we need to encourage people to swim, say.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, I would completely agree with what Tino was saying about, it's this mentality that people see sustainability as challenging or inconvenient or a sacrifice, where what we need to be proponing is the advantages. I mean, everyone was, oh, I'm not going to give up meat. And now there's all of this evidence about how beneficial plant-based diets are and how healthy it is for people to basically be vegan. And I think that, what Tina was saying about, the travel aspect, it's just this mentality that it's convenient to fly, so I'm going to fly, and that's the easiest way. I do have to say that I've had people talk to me about the problem with taking the train is that it's more expensive. But if more people took it, that's supply and demand. So that might be a solution that we can advocate for in terms of, if we all start taking the train places. I mean, anytime I travel within, I've been to Germany twice this year, and I took the train both times, and I had a great time on it. It's definitely much more relaxing because you're not worried about missing your flight. And it's, if you miss the train, then you take the next one 5 minutes later or whatever. And, I felt very comfortable traveling on it. I really love taking the train, but I know that there is that fear to it. And the other part that's been brought up is the expense. And I think that's something that we haven't really talked about tonight. I'm not really sure I want to get into it, but there is this aspect of, sustainability is hard. And my design lead at Key Culture always says this, that I think is really valuable. And she always says that sustainability has a marketing problem, and that people think that it's difficult, that it's expensive, that it's inconvenient, that you have to make sacrifices in order to be sustainable. And what I always like to tell people is, start looking at where you already are being sustainable and celebrate those successes and then build on those. And then, if you can talk to people, as someone who's a sustainability advocate, I like to do what Tina was just doing and talk to people about my experience with, for example, train travel, and say, it's really wonderful and these are all the benefits. And then people will start thinking, oh, that's something that I could possibly do too, or at least I can try it and see how it works for me. And if we can, start proponing stories about the positive effects of sustainable lifestyles, then people will see that it's accessible and that it's easy. And I think that's the most important part, is making sustainability accessible for people. It's not, I can't afford it, or it's too much of a sacrifice. If I want a child, I should be able to have a child. But, if I want to, fly back from Europe to the United States to see my parents, like, I should be able to do that. But, there are other things that I can do to help out with that. This is what I was talking about earlier with, it's not black and white. And it's not that you have to sacrifice everything to be sustainable. And it's not that, we can't take care of our collections and lower climate control conditions and be sustainable. It's there are win-win-win solutions, which I always like to say win-win-win, because it's, better for the planet, better for the conservator, and better for the object. So that's from my conservation background again. But I think that that's something that we can also use in our individual agency, is to promote this idea that, start talking about the positive sides of things. Let's, I think it can be really draining if we sit around and talk about how hard it is. And, we don't understand all of it. And it's so much research that, the conversation about the digital footprint. that's a tough one. And part of the reason is because we don't know a lot. And this is something that's been talked about, obviously, a lot during COVID. And I was in a webinar about a month ago, and we were talking about digitization of collections. And, what's the cost benefit of that in terms of carbon footprint and making your collections accessible and staying relevant as a museum while you're closed? Yeah, but at what cost? And we don't know right now because it's such a new thing, and we don't have the tools to calculate it easy, and it can feel overwhelming. And then, we're just going to do it this way. And I think that, if we start looking at the things that are really wonderful and really working and focus on those, then we can help people start focusing on those as well and shift mindsets as well. So I think, power of positivity.
I like that. I just want to mention one thing on that. Okay. So I think it's a power of positivity. I also think it's like opening up the vision field, because I think we're so focused on right now. Like, how are we going to get over this right now? Well, you know what? Based on, exponential curves of technologies and all these kinds of things, soon, in this decades, we don't know when, but soon these things will become much greener. It will, we will have, travel that is faster, that is potentially greener. There are people who are working on these things. How fast they're going to be, we don't know. We get so much energy, in per hour that, that we can literally, if we could do it, we could really get rid of, kind of like meet all the energy use of the world. So that exists, that's possible. How to do it, we're not there yet, but there are people who are working on it. So I like to take the point of view of not getting so much in the nitty gritty of like train and water and faucet and this and that. And I think those things are all super important. But I think if we start looking at this idea of in a more systemic view and get out of our moment right now, because our moment right now is not going to be like it is in a few decades, and look at, how can we, and maybe the way that we're talking about this now, which is very important, is if we frame it as, this year we worked with indigenous consultants on projects, and they frame it about being good ancestors, becoming good ancestors. So how do you become a good ancestor, especially when you're looking, 3 generations back and 4 generations forward? It's an amplified field of view, and that's been really useful for me because, if we don't think, we have to think about things now, how we want the world to become. We all want the world to become more sustainable, kind of, and even maybe more regenerative, like this is something that we're talking about now. So not just sustaining what we have, because what we have is we're having problems with that, but even regenerating. So you have lots of projects that we're going to talk about in our exhibition of the Amazon with Sabino Salgado, the famous photographer, and also in our own exhibition too of the Amazon. Talking about those kinds of projects that are developing. So 1, it's about communication. 2, it's about, what are we doing now that's really good? How can everybody put their locus of control inside? It's not just outside, but what can you do? Taking a train, eating, meatless Monday, like whatever the case may be. Having one less child, or having no children, or deciding that you're gonna just take a flight to visit your parents in the U.S. Whatever it is. But then also coexisting with this vision of the future and how we want to get there. That's almost looking at different horizons. So right now, but like looking at the future, doing your things right now, but looking at what this future could be like and how you can act in it. Because that's how we create this, and thinking like a good ancestor, to children, grandchildren, or to even like the world itself and other generations that we wouldn't even know of. I like to take that view because it becomes much less personal and more about like directional. What direction are we going in, and how can we act in that in a long-term way?
Great, thank you. Because we only have about 5 minutes left, maybe we can see if there are any questions, but I think not so far, right, Marina?
There are no questions. I think it's just that interesting to follow your discussion.
Tino has a question.
But Tino.
Yeah, I would like to say something. To Marcela, I really think that we can learn a lot from the indigenous. That's what I meant with the relation. Any relation is give and take. So relation with no take, it's not really a relation, but the relation where there's only take is an abusive relation, right? So, like, for example, Caitlin's example, like, I started to fly over, but because Atmosphere, like a German NGO about climate conversation, they told me, there's flights from London to New York, which take a third of what normal flight takes. I don't, if you know about this, otherwise I advise you. So I take the train to London, and then I use like 600 kilo of carbon. I try to do as little as possible, and instead of 2,200, I go from Berlin.
Love it.
So, and that's about being in a relation, right? And the problem with Western societies, and that is really a problem with Western societies and a problem of focus on technology. That's why I think if technology is going to play their part, great, but the solution does not lie in technology, because for me, that's more of the same, very masculine attitude, right? So, like, and what is that attitude? It's like the planet is a like a place of natural resources which we can exploit. It's a repository for natural resources which we can exploit. No, that attitude was experimented with in the 19th and 20th century, but that attitude is not sustainable. It cannot be sustained. It can look like fireworks, but it's not sustainable. So, and it's also not really deep and fun. It's a bit one-sided. So that's why I think the new avant-garde are the indigenous people, right? And it's not coincidence that in modernity, in the time of technology, the time of exploiting the planet as a depository for natural resources, the indigenous people were mostly seen as primitive, right? Like, now I think what is interesting about our time that we realize, no, there's much more knowledge about how dealing with that planet, how being in a relationship, right? And so it's not about like sacrificing, because that's often the masochistic, but it's about being in a relation and taking in a more relational approach to the earth, and not. That's why I also was part of like an initiative trying to propose solar panels, but I really think it's too easy to say the solution is going to come from the cause of the problem. Like, that's why I'm very resistant towards technology.
I would like to ask something to everybody of you. Would you reveal to our audience one aspect of sustainability you are personally chewing on right now, whether it's personal or if it's professional?
I mean, for me, like I just continue on. Like, for me, it was a thing a few years ago that I'm doing this for 20 years of taking the train. Then I used to take ship across the ocean. And at some point, I found out that like some ships are really not good. I mean, a cargo ship is in a way good because your carbon footprint is so low, but then it's not really a political alternative because only 6 people can go on a cargo ship. And so my thinking came more towards like, what is the carbon lowest alternative I can take, right? So it's not about that I'm going to be somebody who doesn't use this planet, but I don't want to be somebody who abuses it, right? That's the difference. And so I think using it time, I think, is also what Mother Earth wants to be in a relationship, I want my children to be in action. I want them to want something from me. If they're just like, I don't care about you, I'm doing my life. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm your parent, I want to be in relation with you. I want you to need me, but I don't want you to just like, just use me as a resource, right? No. And so I think that's where it's also, and my struggles, I think, resolved in this kind of question, like being in a relation versus that, like, abusing,
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. I love what Tina was saying about, the use versus abuse. And I couldn't agree more that, there's so much to learn from indigenous peoples and cultures, and in creating that balance with nature and that harmony with nature. And I think that that's something that we've lost in a lot of our, Western society ideals of consumerism and the way that we basically use all the resources without giving back. And it's become take. To answer Marina's question, I think that's a good one. I think the travel thing has always weighed on me. I love traveling. I travel a lot for work. And that's always been something that I felt very guilty about. And Tino, thank you for the tip on the train to London and then flying over, because that's brilliant. And I'm totally going to do that next time, when I'm allowed to travel again. I think that, one of the things that has been kind of I've been chewing on is this financial aspect. And I think that this is something that, we didn't really get into. And I said specifically that I didn't want to. I guess it's because it's so much on my mind. But this is, one of the greatest barriers that I see in the cultural sector in terms of sustainability is people say that they can't afford it. They can't afford to hire a sustainability consultant, or they can't afford to make a retrograde in their institution, or they can't afford to, insulate the walls better, whatever it is. Which, once again, as we talked about earlier, I think is kind of a misconception. Sustainability doesn't have to be expensive, but there's also very little money for funding sustainability initiatives in culture, and that's a little bit. As a nonprofit that works in sustainability and culture, it's this nexus of there's funds for sustainability and then there's funds for culture, but they haven't come together yet. And that may feed into this whole conversation we were having earlier about advocacy and policy, and it's just not yet on the radar as much as it should be. So those are some of the things that go through my mind on a daily basis. I know we're over time, so I'll stop talking.
I'll just say very quickly, I think this idea of going beyond sustainability, like how can we include these by design and this, I can tell you, we don't know how to do it yet, but just having the goal there by design, how can you not only just be sustainable the way that things are now, but how can you change things? So how can you redesign exhibitions? We've done it so that we've reused a lot of the stuff that we have. So we connect it and we actually build things based on sorry, the sun is coming in here. How do we build things? I'm becoming like an art installation as we speak. So how do we build things based on the things that we already have? How can we reuse walls when we do the exhibitions? Because those things, are really, create a lot of trash, especially in bigger exhibitions. So how can we reuse structures? How can we reuse light fixtures? How can we create exhibitions that are already designed in a certain way? When the walls are taken down, they go to a recycling area to be recycled as much as possible. But we're always trying to think about those things and use less and less and use more kind of, let's say, kind of creating these installations that have to do with more projectors that we have and that we reuse. So really looking at the life of these things and how we can kind of tell a story but still reuse them as much as possible. And hopefully the next step is to regenerate. So how we can do that.
I just love how the sunlight comes to your face, Marcela. It's so beautiful, and it's such a nice signal for the positive energy of this talk. Thank you so much so far.
As someone says, nice filter, very sustainable. That's a good closing word, maybe, if you don't have anything to add. I mean, it shows we can go on for hours, I would say, but yeah, now it's time to wrap up. And thank you so much for discussing with us and joining us and giving us some insights. And yeah, we have Marina, maybe you want to say a little bit about our next event.
Yes, I'd love to. Next week on Thursday, we're going to have our second Tech Time, which is not just another Zoom meeting. It's an art tech late night show with presentations, with music, with an experiment, and it's on the wonderful topic of artificial intelligence and art. We have the Obvious Collective from Paris presenting their artwork, and Noura Al-Badri talking about her artwork and about decolonization in museums with AI. So please join us. Please register on our website. It's online. And yeah, we're going to see each other next week, hopefully. I'm very much looking forward to this event.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Goodbye. Thank you.